Hey everyone, welcome to Up to the Second College Football, Episode 7. We do this for the Saturdays, and Alabama lost to Texas A&M. Yeah, we kind of know about that story. We're going to talk to Ross Dellenger of SI, break down everything happening in college football, and of course the big matchups out there. Georgia, Kentucky, a couple undefeated teams going at it. Alabama, Mississippi State. How about A&M, Missouri? A&M after that big win over Alabama, they go on the road. We'll see if they can continue doing it. And Auburn and Arkansas, a couple teams coming off a couple of losses. What does that mean for them moving forward? It's Up to the Second College Football. All right, now to our first guest of the show, and college football is drunk right now. We got so many things going on. Alabama falling to A&M. You've got Georgia just dominating. Let's get into it with SI's Ross Dellenger here on Up to the Second College Football. Ross, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, no problem. Good to be on.
So make sense of this past Saturday. I was at Kyle Field for the Aggie game against Bama, but just all day. Texas OU, you got the Ole Miss Arkansas game, and the way the night ended with A&M Alabama just makes sense of what we saw this past weekend.
Yeah, it was, I would guess to date, the wildest Saturday in college football so far. You hit the three games. Yeah, they were intense. The Oklahoma-Texas game was kind of going on at the same time as Arkansas Ole Miss, and thank goodness I had two screens because it was crazy, and each of them ended in wild ways. And I think they combined to score like 200 and something points. Those four teams. So it was pretty incredible. And then of course you move to the late game where obviously A&M pulled so far the upset of the year, and the biggest, probably arguably the biggest upset since Nick Saban's second year at Alabama. He lost to UL Monroe his first year. So that was, I guess that was the biggest upset, but there probably would be some people who would call A&M's win bigger just because of the program that Nick has built 14 years in. I mean, that was his first year. So it was incredible to watch A&M do that. That was the A&M team, I think, that we all kind of expected coming into the season, the one that we didn't see in a lot of games previously.
How do you think this plays out for Bama the rest of the way? Because it looks like they have no wiggle room. And how does it play out for A&M?
Well, for the SEC, you would think it plays out pretty well because you're right. Bama doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. But when if they're going to be pretty heavy favorites, I think in every game up until the SEC championship game, and if they win that game, then you have two one-loss SEC teams that will find themselves in the playoff, which I believe would be the first time ever that you'd have two one-loss teams from a conference make the playoffs, and I would expect that's what would happen, but the SEC championship game all of a sudden went from it was when you had Alabama in Georgia potentially undefeated, it wasn't an elimination game because they're both going to get in no matter what. And now all of a sudden there's a little more higher stakes, and that's why I was saying it's actually in a way can be looked at it as a positive for the SEC because now the game is, if they do all go through and win all their games, regular season games like they're kind of predicted to do, it kind of sets up for an elimination game. So a little more intensity, for A&M, they got to, you would think this would give them incredible momentum, and they're playing a team, although they're on the road, I think at Missouri, but they're playing a team in Missouri that really struggled. And they have struggled defensively, and I can imagine that this momentum should certainly carry on to a victory there, and you would think that A&M would have their sights all of a sudden on a pretty good bowl game, given the momentum that this should kind of move them toward.
Let's talk a little bit about the other big game coming up this weekend, Georgia Kentucky. Kentucky's really making some noise this year, but when I watched Georgia, I mean, even before the Alabama loss, I thought they were the best team in the country.
Yeah, it's just hard to see Kentucky moving the ball consistently against them. Going into the Georgia Arkansas game, I was talking to somebody that was really excited about the game and excited about Arkansas and the Hogs start, and I think they're 4-0 and going to that game, and I just kind of let the person down that they should expect a 27-0, 30-7 game, and it ended up being even worse, 37-0. And I get a similar feeling about the Kentucky game, maybe not quite as big of a margin, but you just kind of feel like a 24-0 or 27-7 game is coming. Kentucky needs to force some turnovers. Seeing them move the ball, especially the length of the field against Georgia, is to me almost impossible. But then again, the Cats have been on quite a roll, and what they did, obviously LSU struggling big time this year, but what they did on the ground against LSU offensively is really impressive.
Another game I'm really intrigued by, Oklahoma State and Texas. How does Texas rebound after that colossal loss? Well, blowing a 21-point lead, but having a lot of, offensive firepower with Bijan back there. But also, Oklahoma State's been a team that's playing really well.
They have, and you look at Oklahoma State's schedule, and no real super impressive wins. And so it's one of those things you just don't know kind of how good they are, how strong they are, and we're going to find out, because I think we know that Texas is a pretty good team, probably not a great team at this point, but a pretty good team. I know they got blown out against Arkansas, but in a lot of ways, right, they probably should have closed the game out and beaten Oklahoma. They showed that they are just as good of a team, if not better. But that's how the ball bounces a little bit, and they didn't close out the game defensively. So this will be a really big test for Oklahoma State, and we'll kind of, I think, we'll be able to show us, are they really that good? Should they be grouped with all these other undefeated teams? They got the win against Baylor. They got the win at Boise State by like 1 point, a Boise State team that's really struggled. So I think Texas ends up getting them, and I have a feeling it might not even be that close. I think that Texas's offense kind of explodes, and we're going to see another undefeated team lose a game.
Ross, let's talk about the Oklahoma situation, the quarterback situation there. Caleb Williams obviously coming through and doing such great work for Oklahoma, and now there's reports that Spencer Rattler's running with the second team. Is he going to be okay with that? I mean, he seems like to be a good locker room kid, but that just, from being a top pick in the NFL draft to a Heisman contender to now being the backup, it just, if that ends up being true, just a weird situation there.
Yeah, it is. I don't know that I've ever seen a situation quite like it, where you have, not just a incumbent starter, even a highly rated incumbent starter, but an incumbent starter who is projected as a potential first round draft pick and Heisman Trophy favorite, get benched halfway through the year. I don't know that we've ever had that. I can't remember it happening. But the guy behind him is pretty dang good, and was number one ranked, I believe, quarterback in his class coming out of the Washington, D.C. area. Oddly enough, working on a story on him, Caleb Williams, and I actually visited his high school earlier this week here in the D.C. area. And everybody kind of knew that he had the stuff, and he just needed to the opportunity. And something tells me he's not going to let go of that opportunity, barring some kind of injury or something, that he's probably going to keep that. And it'll be interested to see if Lincoln Riley can keep Spencer Rattler, because backup quarterbacks, as we know, are very, very important when it gets late in the season, especially in the playoffs. Injuries start popping up. You start getting bruised and battered. You need those backup quarterbacks.
Could you see Spencer transferring and playing one more year of college football, or going straight to the league?
Yeah, that's kind of the big question. He's eligible as a redshirt sophomore, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of decision that he makes. I'm just guessing here. Certainly don't know Spencer and don't know his family or anything, but I would guess that he would put his name in for the draft. I guess it all depends on what kind of evaluations and projections he gets, after the season from scouts and such, because it's pretty clear he's got talent. He just maybe upstairs, needs a little more refinement, and maybe that's what he needs. Maybe he needs one more year of college football. But scouts might end up telling him, you might as well go now, right? You're already 3 years out.
Last one for you, Arkansas, Auburn, two teams that really are having a really nice year, but they've lost 2 in a row. It could be 3. It's going to be 3 in a row for one of those two teams.
Yeah, it's funny because I think we might look back on it, and Arkansas could be a pretty good football team this year, maybe borderline great football team, and they could have 4 losses. But that so goes to the SEC West. So yeah, this is an intriguing matchup. Auburn went down to Tiger Stadium, pulled one out. Obviously couldn't move the ball again, like most teams couldn't move the ball, especially on the ground against Georgia, and that really cost them that game. It'll be interesting to see if they can get going a little bit with Bo Nix and move the ball and get that running game spark, because they really need that. If they can get that going, maybe they can make it a game. But I like Arkansas on that one to kind of bounce back and from those losses to Ole Miss and of course to Georgia.
Yeah, and I'm looking at what Auburn's done, and not 3 in a row, but they did lose that Penn State game early on, and then obviously the Georgia game. So we'll see how they bounce back there. Ross, great stuff as always. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, guys, our big game of the week is a huge showdown. A couple of undefeated teams in the SEC. You got 6-0 Kentucky, 6-0 Georgia, the number 1 team in the country. And with a Kentucky perspective, we're joined by Nick Roush of KSR, Kentucky Sports Radio, and Dean Legge with a Georgia point of view. They're from dogpost.com. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right, so Nick, let's start with you. How has Mark Stoops built this team, not only for this year, but for future success?
It's really all started in the trenches. I think Kentucky fans for the longest time, you had Hal Mummy come in. You thought you had to win with a gimmick here. And Stoops has proven that that's not necessarily the case. It helps that the state of Kentucky has cultivated some better talent in recent years. You saw Jedrick Wills win national championships. Damian Harris, part of those teams. Kentucky's getting better in-state talent, especially on the offensive line. You've got a couple on there right now, and that's kind of been their identity. We're going to play physical football. We're going to run the ball. We're going to recruit well inside in Kentucky, in the state of Ohio. Now they're going a little bit further south, and I think to really reach that next level, they're getting a few playmakers here and there, but they've got to beat Georgia. They've got to beat Georgia to be able to win some of those recruiting battles. I know the guy that had the big play, the big return for a touchdown against Florida, he's a South Georgia guy. Getting those type of players, that's the next step, and this is the next step, and really the final step in Mark Stoops' rebuild is to knock off Georgia.
Dean, before I saw A&M beat Alabama, I thought Georgia was the best team in the country. Obviously, now the rest of the country is thinking that same way. How have they gotten stronger with competition getting stronger? I know they obviously started with Clemson, but I feel like every test that they've had, they put out their best performance.
Well, there's some truth to that. I mean, they've gotten better as the season's gone on, even though they're quite banged up right now, frankly. But they're very deep. The way that Kirby Smart has built this program is finally really coming into fruition. I think that they wanted to be balanced as much as they could offensively, even with the quarterbacks being in and out. That's happened. And on the defensive side of the ball, which is his trademark, they're extremely deep, and they're putting to use the recruiting advantages or success that they've had in the past. They've also developed some guys too, frankly. And it's just all of the little pieces are adding up for them.
All right, Nick, I got to ask you, does Kentucky look at it as a sign of disrespect that they are not favored in this one? They're 21-point underdogs in this one. Do they look at that as a sign of disrespect, or maybe as a, look, this is how good Georgia's been this year?
Kentucky just loves being the underdog. I think last week, Darian Kennard, the all-SEC right tackle, when we told him they were favorites against LSU, he's like, really? Well, I don't think we are, because I don't think we get enough respect. Kentucky, this team's really taken on the identity of Mark Stoops. He's a guy who's always got a chip on his shoulder, who's, Bob's little brother. He's out to prove something, and that's what this Kentucky team's out to do. They know they're the underdog, but that's right where they want to be going into this matchup against top-ranked Georgia.
Dean, do you think that Kirby is looking at this game and reminding his players, look what happened just last week in College Station with Alabama, that yes, you're favored in this game, but this is a very capable SEC opponent?
Well, I think they don't. Kentucky is going to be one of the most physical teams they have to deal with. They might not be the most skilled necessarily, although that has improved. The problem with Georgia is dealing with Kentucky this week is Kentucky's built in a similar way to Georgia. They're very rough on the lines. And, having covered this game since the late 90s, this is as physical as Kentucky's been. The 18 team was pretty good too, but it's the same situation. So in terms of the, look at Alabama, I think they try not to focus on what's happened elsewhere. They have dealt with Kentucky enough. Last year, that was an ugly game that Georgia won 14-3, a real physical fight. The year before that in Athens was 21-0, but it was just not, it wasn't pretty. And then in 18, same situation. They don't get easy wins over Kentucky. That's the thing. It might look like an easy win, but I can assure you last year was not an easy win. It was 14-3, and a lot of Georgia fans were pissed off.
Well, and to your point, I think that's what gives Kentucky some confidence here. That they've talked a lot about, we got to get to Atlanta. We got to get to Atlanta. And it's not really lip service. That's a goal. And to get that goal, they have to get by a Georgia team that they've played close. They've knocked on that door. And I think if you're a Kentucky fan selling yourself that it's possible, that's kind of the trajectory of the way the Florida streak went, where you lost all these games years and years in a row. You played them close 3 or 4 times, and then now you've beaten them twice in the last 4 years. I think that's where their mindset. They've been there before. It's just this Georgia beast. It's a little bit more difficult to take down because they are so similar in style. Kentucky is Georgia-like at this point, and they've got to have some playmakers have those big moments to really serve as equalizers in a game where they're outmatched as far as skill talent goes. So take care of the ball and make a few plays here and there.
Let's talk a little quarterback on both sides, and Nick, we'll keep it with you. How big has quarterback play been for Kentucky this year? I saw some flexing out there. I saw some great playing out there from Will.
Well, and Will's really added a little bit of personality to this offense that was for such a long time. It was just, we're going to run it right at you, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. He's made some really impressive throws down the field. I know the explosive plays have been there to Wan'Dale Robinson, but really his ability to kind of ad-lib, make plays in space, and then on busted plays, pick up the ball, put his nose down, and get the first down. He had one that was a SportsCenter top 10 play last week on a scramble. And then the only third down Kentucky converted against Florida was a snap that hit the ground. He just picked it up and went straight forward for 3 yards. So I think when you play a team like Georgia that's going to, play 2 safeties high, there's going to be some times where he just has to, the pressure's coming, get out of there and go get some aggravating yards. There's not a lot of chinks in the armor of that Georgia defense. So you've got to be able to nickel and dime them and aggravate them with that quarterback run. That's where I think Levis can be the most valuable this weekend.
All right, Dean, what about a Georgia perspective there? You got JT Daniels. What's his story right now? And I know Stetson Bennett's giving the coaches something to consider here long term.
Well, we won't know with JT until, of course, we record these things in the middle of the week at times, and at the time we're recording this, we just don't know yet with JT because of their practice schedule at Georgia. My suspicion is that he will play at some point, and if he's going to play, he'd start. We just don't know yet. In terms of Stetson's long-term situation, JT is the starting quarterback at Georgia. He gives them the best option to win. Stetson played his best game at Georgia. That's the 4th time I think he's beaten a ranked team as a starter at Georgia. So he gives you the ability to run for sure, but JT gives them the ability to just score a lot of points with very little problem. It seems. The question is, when will JT be healthy enough to go? He would have been an emergency guy last week at Auburn. Stetson didn't make any mistakes, never got hurt, really never got hit. And so we didn't see JT. We'll know probably probably by Thursday what the story is with Georgia. But I got to tell you, this whole year at Georgia has been a roller coaster of not necessarily knowing. And some of us are tied in pretty well and not knowing really what's going on, because it's been a muscle injury. It's been a lat. It was a oblique. It's just been tricky with JT. But when he's played, they've really scored.
Nick, Roush, Dean, Legge, we appreciate your time, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the other big storyline in this one, A&M taking down Alabama this weekend. They get Missouri, and we're going to talk about it with my good buddy from TexAgs.com. I actually work there as well. Olin Buchanan, the Heisman Trophy voter and columnist. What's going on, OB?
Just looking forward to another big week of college football this weekend, and still enjoying what happened last weekend.
Yeah, so I was there with you, but I want you to give your perception. We got great video of you, by the way, but just sum up the atmosphere at the game as soon as you stepped on the field, and then obviously throughout the victory and how the fans all came on the field.
Well, I think at first it started out with a party atmosphere, just because there's a game at Kyle Field and it's Alabama. I think most people came not expecting A&M win, but to see what they could do against the number one team in the country. And then gradually it was like, okay, well, they're hanging in. How long can they do that? And then after, I think the Von A-Chain answered the block punt for a touchdown by returning the ensuing kickoff 96 yards for a touchdown and giving A&M a 2-touchdown lead. At that point, I thought it became it became real, that the possibility of pulling off this dramatic upset was real, and the fans really just started getting into it at that point and believing. And then Alabama comes back and takes the lead in the last 5 minutes, and it was a disappointment. But hey, I think the crowd was like, okay, we gave them a heck of a run. But then after that kickoff, when A&M's down 7, and the first play is a 17-yard completion to Anaya Smith, and Zach Calzada is continuing to play well, I think then it reached a fever pitch, because the 100,000 plus in the stadium thought, hey, it can still happen. And then when it did, it was just, insanity. And as great of atmosphere as I've ever seen anywhere, and probably one of the most memorable nights ever at Kyle Field.
Obi, I know we were trying to figure it out on TexAgs radio, but which A&M team is the real A&M team? The team we saw for 5 weeks, which was pretty good against inferior opponents, struggled with SEC play, or the team that just took it to Alabama? Or are we going to find out, I guess, in the next few weeks?
Yeah, probably somewhere in the middle, and we'll find out in the next few weeks. But I think that the team we saw against Alabama was the one we thought we'd see all year. A&M was ranked, 5th or 6th coming into the season. Of course, you were replacing a starting quarterback and 4 offensive linemen, but 9 defensive starters back and a lot of skill guys back. So there was, as you know, so much anticipation, so much optimism for this season. And then when they don't play well and you lose your starting quarterback, I think all that optimism went out the window until that game. And I think the Alabama game showed what this team is capable of. And I think a game like that can be a springboard, if you use it correctly, to get some momentum, and you can ride that all the way through the season. But again, that's if you use it correctly, because if you're still celebrating that win when you're playing your next game, that excitement, that optimism can disappear pretty quick.
Let's talk about your favorite topic, people talking about Jimbo Fisher's $9 million contract. It's funny. I didn't hear much about it this past weekend.
Yeah, it is funny because, Jimbo Fisher makes a lot of money. What college football coach doesn't? And if you've won a national championship, you're going to even make that much more, because you have to pay him that to get him away from Florida State. And then he does well here. You know that there's maybe an opening coming up at LSU. You could see that. I think Ross Bjork and the A&M administration saw that and decided, hey, let's give Jimbo a raise and an extension. And right now it's looking like a good move. But what I think is ironic is after they gave him the extension, there were those that were in the national media especially that were criticizing A&M for making that move. Now you see the national media talk about, well, LSU could go after, if they do indeed fire Ed Orgeron after this season, could go after Jimbo Fisher and offer him $10 million. And when it's a team like LSU or somebody of that ilk, the national media doesn't even question it. But when it's an A&M, I don't understand. I guess they're just uncomfortable with a new team entering that caste system of the elite or trying to. Then that makes them uncomfortable. But hopefully with A&M winning that game against Alabama, and if they continue to play well, then that whole tired narrative of, well, A&M's paying Jimbo Fisher so much, hopefully that'll no longer be an issue.
All right, last thing for you. Missouri, terrible defense, especially stopping the run. Their offense can move the ball. They play pretty well at home. They played Kentucky early in the year, pretty tough. How do you expect this one to go down off of A&M's victory over Alabama?
Well, if A&M comes completely prepared to play, I would think that Jimbo Fisher would really use his running backs a lot. Isaiah Spiller, Devon Achin, that might be as good of a combination of running backs as there is anywhere in the country. And like you said, Missouri's been having some trouble stopping the run. So I would think you would give them a heavy dose of your running game and mix in some play action passes. Maybe their top cornerback tore an ACL last week, Ennis Rakestraw, so he's out. So there's that's a defense that is reeling, and you don't want them to get well against you. And I think the smart thing to do, it would seem to be the practical approach, again, would just look to see where you have the greatest advantage. It appears to be with your running game against their run defense. So give it to your workhorses, and then if you get those linebackers and safety starting to cheat up, go ahead and try the play action pass and see if you can't beat them for a big play.
Appreciate you, OB. Thank you very much.
You bet.
All right, from A&M, we move on to Alabama. They're on the road taking on Mississippi State this week, and we're joined by BamaInsider.com's Tony Tsoukalas, who I got to chat with during the game. We talked at halftime. You're like, man, I don't know. And, buddy, that was a game.
I think, the last time I came on here, I don't know if I said that A&M even had a shot at this one, but wow, was I wrong? I mean, Calzada, man, decides to come alive against Alabama, right?
So I did this thing. I listened to the Feinbaum show the other day, and I listened to a lot of Alabama fans, and goodness gracious, people are upset about Nick Saban, about the defensive coordinator, about Bill O'Brien. Like, people are really upset the way that game turned out. Let me ask you this. Was Bama bad, or because in my opinion, A&M was just really good that day?
I think it's probably both. I think what's frustrating from an Alabama standpoint is I just came out with 7 plays, or probably even more, that, doomed Alabama. I think, if you reversed any one of those 7 plays, Alabama could have won. And that's 7 times that Alabama did something, whether it was the interception at the goal line or, even stuff as little as, if Jaleel Billingsley, the tight end, if he catches a ball that he just lets bounce off of his chest on that final drive, that game's at least going into overtime because Alabama would move the ball, take some time off. They might be the one kicking the game-winning field goal. Who knows? But those things just didn't happen. And I don't necessarily think that's, Texas A&M. I think when you're a good team or when you play well, those things happen to the opponent. So I think Texas A&M played really well. And that's what happens. You put your opponent in situations where they do make mistakes and they matter. You know what I'm saying? Texas A&M played well enough for those mistakes to haunt Alabama, where some opponents in the past haven't played well enough. So if Alabama was to make those mistakes, they couldn't capitalize them because they weren't doing the stuff that they needed to. I think Texas A&M played really great. In the second half, I think they were kind of overpowered, but it didn't matter because they were really dominant in the first half, and they did the things that mattered in the second half to pull off the win, whether it be the kickoff return for a touchdown or driving when they absolutely needed points. So you got to tip your hat to Texas A&M. They played really well, and they exposed Alabama's mistakes.
How did Coach Saban respond to some of the questions out there about the red zone offense? And you know what drive I'm talking about, where they settled for 3 and they threw 3 straight times, I believe, when they made it 31-30.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's crazy. Alabama, if you count the time that they got inside the 9 on that third down, they got inside the 10-yard line 3 times and came away with 6 points, which is ridiculous. But no, I think there's been a lot of questions about that particular drive where they threw it. I think it was a 1-yard loss to John Mechie, then an incomplete pass on looked like a rub route that kind of ended up hurting Alabama more than it did A&M, and you had the incompletion to Bolden. So I know which one you're talking about. I think most Alabama fans, when you talk about them being upset with Bill O'Brien, I think that's what you're circling is, you've got a guy like Brian Robinson who's running the ball really well. Why don't you hand him off the ball? I think Nick Saban really it was kind of interesting because he almost kind of gave a non-answer, like he didn't really know at that point. I think it's easy to question. I think what Nick Saban would say there, and he kind of did, is it's easy to question at that point when things don't go right. You do have to look. There were a couple of times when Texas A&M was stopping Alabama on short, early times, and I could see where maybe Bill O'Brien was probably thinking, well, if they get a stop here, I don't know, maybe it turns into, you don't want to face a 3rd and 1, but I just find it very puzzling myself that Alabama didn't run the ball at least one of those times. Our 3rd and 1 at the, when Bryce Young threw the interception, I mean, run the ball twice, shoot, right. You know what I'm saying? You've got a first year starter, backup kind of quarterback, back him up to the end zone. If you know what I'm saying? If A&M stops Alabama twice on 3rd and goal at the 1, then you got to have faith in your defense is going to make Calzada, have a mistake or something. It's just kind of a puzzling situation.
Tony, as a longtime guy who's covered the Texans and followed the Texans, maybe he was just trying to get fired. Apparently, that's what he told people towards the end of his run there. Maybe he's just trying to get fired. Maybe he gets that LSU job. Let's move on to does Bama have any wiggle room the rest of the year? Because as it stands right now, outside of the college football playoffs, it's the thinking. Obviously, we have to wait a little bit. But, if you win out, you still have Georgia at the end of the season. Do you see any wiggle room for any mistakes?
I don't think so. And I don't think they can lose to Georgia either. We've never seen a 2-loss team in the playoff. We've never seen a 2-loss team in the playoffs. I don't necessarily think we're going to see one. I mean, maybe if it's a close game against Georgia and they just really blow out people, and then that would depend on, how things go in the rest of college football. But I don't see it. I just don't see it.
How about
I think when you look at it in a certain aspect, this is a good loss for Alabama if they're going to have a loss, because A&M already has two SEC losses. So Alabama still controls its destiny moving forward. But not only they don't have wiggle room, they really need to kind of bounce back pretty quickly, because they're playing a Mississippi State team that beat A&M. And it has a really good run defense. You talk about running the ball. I mean, Mississippi State can stop that. So there's been a lot of sense of urgency with this Alabama team just in the few media sessions we've had after that. It'd be interesting to see how they respond. But if they were to go out and lose, I don't really know which game it would be, because they got Mississippi State, Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn. But if they were to lose any of those games, I just can't see. It looks like they're going to be playing for just a bowl game.
Here's the part I'm having a hard time, and last thing for you. A week ago, Bryce Young is considered the favorite for the Heisman, and now people are talking about how bad he looked against A&M, and I'm looking at these numbers. Yeah, he was pressured a lot, threw for 369, 3 touchdowns in 1 pick. Did he look bad? Is that what it is, or is it just the flow of the game? I think he was pressured a lot, and that changed the complexity.
He didn't have his normal stellar stuff, and there were some times when he misjudged guys. I mean, if you're going to be critical of him, there were some passes that were low. I mean, look, even the wide open pass to Jamison Williams, that almost hit the dirt, for the end zone. But more or less, I think in the second half, he was pretty good. The point I made over Twitter was, if that completion I'm talking about with Billingsley on that final drive, if Billingsley catches that, let's say, I think that's like a 13-yard reception. So that puts him up to 380 yards passing. He probably gets, another completion because he has a first down. I mean, you could be talking about if that final drive just, had the catch that he needed it to be, he could have had over 400 yards, and Alabama's kicking the game-winning field goal, and all of a sudden he's got 3 touchdowns, 400 yards, and a game-winning drive, and everyone's talking about maybe that's his Heisman moment, So it's really we live on fine margins when we start picking apart players like that. It's Cameron Latou dropped a touchdown pass, so that would have been 4 touchdowns against a good Aggie defense, or at least a good Aggie defensive front that was pressuring him the whole game. So. I don't think he's horrible. I think he didn't have his best game, and you could argue that with the passing yards, his performance wasn't as good as what the passing yards, maybe showed on paper. But to say he had a bad game is kind of silly. I mean, you don't throw for 369 yards on the road in an SEC game and it'd be a bad game.
Appreciate you, Tony. Thanks so much, my friend.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, we're closing things out with Auburn and Arkansas, 2 teams coming off a loss. Both need a huge win this upcoming weekend. With an Arkansas perspective, we're joined by Tera Talmadge, PickTrailNation.com, who joins us all the time here on the show. What's going on, Tera?
You know what? It could be better after 2 straight losses for Arkansas for sure. But you know what? Still a lot of excitement left for this season.
Hey, so let's go back to the Ole Miss game, because if it wasn't for the A&M game, I guess if it wasn't for the Texas OU game, I mean, a lot more would have been made, and I know a lot was made of the way that game ended, Ole Miss, but against Ole Miss. Sam Pittman did so. I know nationally people are loving what he did there. How are people locally feeling about going for 2 at the end of that game?
I think it's pretty much 50-50 right now. I mean, for the majority, though, I'd probably say a lot of people are sticking with Pittman because I like that he didn't second guess it at all. The moment Arkansas scored that touchdown with 1 second left on the clock, you just saw Pittman on the sideline with his fingers up, going for two, no doubt about it. And with the way that game was going, truthfully, I think it's the right decision because Arkansas's defense really could not stop Ole Miss at that point. So it could have gone better. Obviously, I don't know if that play is something that they'd want to do again. However, at the same time, I'm impressed that they went for it.
Isn't this season just a microcosm of SEC play? Because here you have Arkansas, who rises to the top 10. They've looked phenomenal. They've lost 2 straight, potentially could be 3, although I think I like your chances at home against Auburn. But let's just, for kicks and giggles, discuss that. And you still have Alabama on your schedule. I mean, just what the SEC is all about, unfortunately or fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy what's been happening in the SEC. I mean, you guys know pretty well beating Alabama the other night. So there's still a lot of potential for Arkansas going forward this season. I know that a lot of people are concerned about Auburn being that they put up some points on Georgia, but that was a completely different situation in my opinion. I mean, they weren't at home and Georgia was going into that game just to basically get the win, get the job done, get out. Also, there's potential for Arkansas to still have a great season and potentially maybe finish 3rd in the West. So we'll have to wait and see.
Tera Talmadge with us here on the show. And let's talk about Treylon Burks, because after a slow game versus Georgia, he really helped get the offense going.
I mean, I don't know what kicks him into gear sometimes, but he just goes off in certain games. I mean, he had a great showing against A&M, and now we've seen it again against Ole Miss. The guy is just, he's a playmaker for Arkansas. And it's great, though, to see other guys stepping up as well. Arkansas has a lot of talented receivers, and we got to really see that against Ole Miss. The ball was spread around pretty well. You have Warren Thompson as well, who is making some great plays for the Razorbacks. Tyson Morris has really stepped up for the Razorbacks. So there are guys that KJ Jefferson can get the ball out to.
Hey, so let's talk about the defense, who was so good early on, but now they've given up 89 points in their last 2 games. Yeah. Obviously, when you take on Ole Miss, it's a different animal. Georgia's offense wasn't known to be, a juggernaut, but 89 points in 2 games is a lot.
Yeah, it's not a fantastic stat for sure, especially when I think about the Ole Miss game, though. That series is always just so interesting to me because it's just always so wild, like back and forth. And the craziest things happen in that game. It goes into like 7 overtimes, or if it goes into a last second kick to win the game. So that one I'm not going to judge it too much by, because especially at the same time, Ole Miss has a really balanced offense. They can run it just as well as they can throw it. And that's really difficult for a defense to defend. And so Georgia is different. Georgia is extremely talented, and they completely botched that game, in my opinion. And I know that they would say the same as well. This Ole Miss game was probably one of their poorest tackling games for sure. And so that's something they're definitely going to work on going forward.
All right, so Arkansas defeats Auburn if they what?
Oh, there's a few things probably. If they tackle better, their defense has to be on point this week. They can't allow all that points that they've been allowing the past couple of weeks. That's got to be fixed. I think one of the things that they should probably do is take advantage of Auburn's secondary. Teams have been throwing pretty well against Auburn so far this season. So I think that we've seen enough now to know that KJ Jefferson is fully capable of exploiting that. And there are guys that can make the plays. So that's probably one of the biggest keys for Arkansas going into this game. And hopefully they have a big enough crowd to really make some sort of difference. I know it's an 11 a.m. kickoff, but I think Razorback fans will probably show up pretty well for them.
Tera, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for watching Up to the Second College Football. If you could, like, share, comment, and sign up for the alerts on this video. We'll have a lot more for you. Thank you so much for watching.